it should feel special.
Yeah.
And so with that, crafties, we're going to start the most mediocre intro to a show ever.
The cold
Hello.
open. Are we already doing it? we just cold open them. Just no pomp and circumstance. The opposite.
Look, you all know who he is. He's Covert Go Blue. A lot of you know who I am, Arjuna. Welcome to the Arena Craft podcast. Just your average podcast dedicated to Magic the Gathering Arena among a sea of imitators. However, we are the original. And yeah, dude, I'm stoked to be here on this normal day when nothing special is happening because we're going to talk about rotation.
Yes. Yes. Oh, I get to broadcast from a normal setup in my own home. Yeah.
Epic.
Yeah? I'm happy about that.
Yep. So, in brief, how was the return to the throne, Covert Go Blue?
Amazing. I say amazing. What was amazing was when you hit go live or you hit record and things are working and it just feels like getting back to normal, like coming home from a really awkward trip. If you've ever been on a vacation that felt more exhausting than being at home, you know what I'm talking about. It was like that. And then when you power up and you go live or you hit record and things are working, there are a few better feelings in the world. You know, this is where I belong, doing what I love. The journey to get there is full of just awkward. Why the hell? I just unplugged this and plugged it back in. Nothing is different. So why is it not working now? There is so much of that goes into streaming and YouTubing and podcasting that the people, you don't have to worry about it. You at home, you don't have to worry about this. You can just enjoy the content and you can imagine the trials and tribulations behind the scenes. And if you have feelings about it, you can feel better by going to our Patreon and dropping a few bucks. But yeah, it's good to put all that behind me and do what I love to do. So thanks for asking.
Well, you're back. You're looking bluer than ever, CGB. So love it. Love it, man. And, just wanted to give you a shout out for the truly epic pulling through that you did last week. I think none of the crafties will ever quite understand just how much went into that. So, yeah, man, sometimes looking drop dead sexy takes a lot more work than you think it does.
If you knew the amount of time I spend in hair and makeup.
I mean, the budget. So stop by the Patreon, crafties. Yeah, thank you. All right. All right. So today we are going to get into rotation, but I wanted to address, I think there were a number of decks that we didn't talk about last week in our standard 2022 roundup. And I thought we should just give them a shake because I think that we omitted a couple of decks, which, seem to be pretty good and people cared about them stuff. They certainly cared about them enough to ask about them. So
where did people let you know about that?
I saw them in the YouTube comments. I saw them on Twitter. I saw them in the Discord.
Yeah. So if you're out there listening or watching and you have opinions about decks we should have covered or didn't mention in the tier list, a lot of ways to get at Arjuna and myself, although more Arjuna than me. I've built up an ignoring comments tolerance, but Arjuna still gets in there. He's looking for that interaction.
Yep. I'm definitely the good cop, crafties. So reach out to me when you want a little taste of. Well, I was going to say something ridiculous there, but I'll skip on it anyway. So standard 2022, last week we gave our power rankings, as it were. I think that we hit all of the decks which either of us thought were in serious contention. However, there were a couple which people have played and enjoyed, which I think it would be fun to discuss. So we're going to do that before we get into our rotation talk here. And the first deck that I wanted to raise is Orozov Angels.
Ooh, okay. Good one.
Pretty potent deck, right? I think we've all lost to it.
Yes. If you haven't lost to Orozov Angels yet, that would surprise me. I've lost to it with a number of decks. When considering it for the tiers, one thing that I look at is how will this deck do if people really care about stopping it? And second, how much kind of agency or flexibility is in the deck? And I have no doubt that Orozov Angels can get a lot of people to Mythic because when it draws. It's just kind of this collection of a little bit of synergy and a ton of power, right? And if it just curves on you and drops its best cards in the right spots, it's very, very hard to deal with for a number of matchups. But I don't feel like there's flexibility there. You know what I mean? It doesn't feel like you have a lot of agency. Either your good hand hits 5 lands and casts 3 to 4 powerful cards, and your opponent has moments of weakness to them, or you don't. And maybe it's kind of a bias I have against like kind of tribal play out your stuff strategies. I'm definitely not usually the guy for that, and maybe there's a way to find flexibility in it. But for the most part, I don't see it as a tier 1 contender. And I think early in the format, when nobody was ready for it and it was easy to underestimate, it might have been a tier 2 deck. Now I think it's a little more tier 3 now that the power things in the format have been figured out, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm pretty much with you on this. One of the things that I look for in decks in Standard 2022 is to see how many of the powerful cards from quote unquote regular Standard they're rocking, you know? And I think that the Angels deck is like, it's kind of like a catch-all. It's like a catching bowl for like a number of the trickle downs from Standard that never really made it into the normal Standard. And I'm not dissing on these cards. They're all sweet cards like Fierce's Retribution and the Valkyrie's Enchantment, stuff like that, which I'm really glad that they're seeing play. But these are cards that just can't really hack it alongside some of the stronger cards in the format. I compare it to cards like a Seeker's Chariot, for example, which have seen, fringe to moderate play in regular Standard, but really shine in this format. But I think that this deck is just full of cards which they're just not quite getting there. Now it's pretty cool to see how you go to a format like Historic and all of a sudden, some of your cheaper Angels are really shining in that format, but they've got a lot of backup. So yeah, I think that this deck for me is kind of like, it's a collection of like, what's the sports terminology? That they're like, it's a collection of benches. It's like the B team, right?
The B team. I mean that's tier B by default. Yeah, the bench warmers, the irregulars, the practice squad. Exactly. Somewhere out there, the fans of pro wrestling remember Daniel Bryant being called a B+ player, and they're going to rally behind the Angels now and start the Hallelujah movement. But here's the thing. We sound like we're trashing it. Let's go here. Is it the best Standard Angel deck ever? Think of an Angel tribal deck in Standard. Has it really happened? They keep trying to make great Angels, but has Angel tribal really happened? I feel like this is as close as it's ever been.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing for the Angel fans. Like they're
certainly pushing it.
Yeah.
And now that I think about it, Innistrad has had some pretty dope Angels, right?
Yes. So Sigarda is on the art for Innistrad, so Sigarda's coming back at least. Maybe she'll get bitten by a werewolf. Werewolf angel creature.
That would be dope.
Yeah.
Or, perhaps Eldrazi angel creature, although we have already seen that before. Maybe Phyrexian angel. Who knows?
I want no Eldrazi's. There are a lot of people out there going, what happened to the Eldrazi? Because they were on Innistrad last time, if we're getting into lore. And I'm just like, I don't want the Eldrazi back. They were just... We had like a year of Eldrazi. I lived through it. I'm over the Eldrazi forever. I just want good old classic horror playing Innistrad.
Yeah, you survived the Eldrazi winter. Yep. So, I'm with you, CGB. If this deck gets a few more good Angels and Angel build-arounds, it could be very, very sweet. But I agree, it suffers from... So here's another thing you have to think about, right? Think about a deck like Rogues. So, sure, it's built around a core of Rogues, but really there are just many, many, many cards in that deck that have nothing to do with Rogues that just happen to be very good, and that's why the deck ended up being really good. And I think if an Angels deck ends up being good, it's going to be the same thing. And I think that currently it gets to play cards like Vanishing Verse, which is very good. Plenty of good cards in the colors, like Elite Spellbinder, for example, that fit very well into the game plan. But I think that, if we do end up seeing a really good Angels deck in the format, it's probably going to be a strong core of like 12 or so angels, and then just a lot of other really fantastic cards around them.
Yeah, yeah, 100% agree.
Cool. All right, let's go on to another deck which is always in danger of getting better cards in it, which is Bant Party. So this is a deck we probably haven't even mentioned this on the show yet.
You played it. Yeah. Once upon a time, you had played it a bit, and you talked about it at the beginning of the show. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, this deck is cool. I've taken it for a spin. It can definitely do powerful things. So, you have these sequences where you go something like Jaspera Sentinel into Luminarch Aspirant, into Linvala, into Squad Commander. And yeah, you feel like an absolute god. Often crush your opponents when you do stuff like that. Then you have the games where you just draw like 2 Jaspera's Sentinels, 3 Masked Vandals, maybe like too late in the game. It just like, it can get so awkward so quickly. And another thing that I don't like about the deck is just the mana is terrible.
Oof. I mean, oof.
I mean, with base camp being just, I mean, we've dragged base camp through the mud before, and we don't need to go there again. But yeah, this card, yeah.
The party deck doesn't run base camp. It runs Temple of the Dragon Queen because it has more dragons and just the chance because of shapeshifters. It has no dragons, actually. It's just because of the changelings. And the chance of being able to play it untapped makes it better than base camp. It's embarrassingly bad for that card.
And that's cool tech, by the way. I was really happy to see that particular include with the land. It is pretty sweet. Sometimes it doesn't go the way you want it to, but a surprising amount of the time it does kind of work out. So pretty cool tech for the deck. But yeah, definitely just highlighting the fact that we really need some good, we just need some more good lands to kind of fill in the color pie. And that's definitely one of the things most holding this archetype back, because it's essentially a 3-color aggro deck. And that's hard to make work in the best of formats,
Ooh, yeah. So I like the party deck, and if I were to tier it, it's kind of weird because I feel like everybody else has great draws with the party deck and wins, and I feel like when I play it, I go second, and I play my Sentinel on 1, but then I have a tap land on 2 and no follow-up, and then they kill my Sentinel, and turn 3 I'm playing to an empty board, and I'm behind, and my opponent has... that's how it feels, because the bias of our minds, it depends which way you want to shift it. But I think the longer you play Magic, the longer you feel those fail state, the more you feel those fail states. Whereas maybe the less time you play Magic, the more you feel those god draws. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I've played Magic so long, and I'm not bragging. This is kind of an indictment. So long, I only see fail states. So anytime I see the party deck that requires creatures on the board to be effective, I see a lot of fail state, and I can't tier list it unless it really, really shines. I will say this. Without Extinction Event and with Shadow's Verdict not being popular, Linvala is a card that kind of makes it work. Like, that card is a real pain because Doomscar and Blood on the Snow are good in this format. So against those decks, especially where you can also play Concerted Defense, that the party deck is very favored. I felt like every time I played it, if I went second and got behind on the board even a little, I didn't know how I was going to get it back. I was it felt so bad.
Yeah. Especially if you end up like on the draw against a really strong mono green opening or something, where all like creatures are just 5/5s, and you're looking at your board of dorks, and it just goes awry really quickly.
You will hit Mythic with it. Like, if you play it a lot and are good, at your sequencing, which is really all it asks of you, is trying to get your sequencing right and think about what draws you have to get you into party and how to set up for it. It will get you to Mythic. It will win a fair amount. Tier 2.53. Something like that.
I'm with you. Somewhere between 2 and 3. Yeah. Final note, I do want to give a shout out to Squad Commander for just being like actually a surprisingly really pretty good Magic card. And this deck really highlights that. So, and man, when they slam it on especially when they go like turn 3 Linvala into turn 4 Squad Commander and they assemble Tron, it's just nasty.
I like that. Assemble creature Tron. That's what the party deck does. Yep.
Exactly. Okay, so those were two big ones that featured. I also think people wanted us to spend a little bit more time just talking about, like, we kind of mentioned, we glossed over Rakdos a little bit, but I think people wanted us to just talk a little bit more in depth about those decks.
Tough to
So,
do.
and
There's so many builds, and
yeah,
it's like, okay, why don't you go first? Because I feel like you had something there.
well, I was actually going to pivot a little bit into, I think that we gave only a passing glance to the Mardu version of the deck before. And I think, this deck is emerging like it could be a real player, especially post rotation. It's looking like one of those decks that could perform really well in best of three. So I just wanted to kind of discuss that a little bit and give some of our thoughts on how that could end up playing out.
Okay, yeah. The deck is mostly bangers. It's weird.
Yep.
It's 1 mana garbage and a lot and it's not garbage. It's just like a deck with like 12 1/1s or something like that.
Yeah.
Usually makes you think, okay. And then, but I mean, that's all at the bottom, and then like the middle to the top of the curve is just nothing but bangers. And
yeah,
I do think that this is a deck that if we had a pro scene and pros were playing this format, they would be tuning and tweaking it, because the win rates I've put up with the deck when I played it have been very, very good. And but I think it would be great after sideboarding, because its colors are pretty stable and there's a lot of options. Like Orcus can come in if you want board wipes and things like that. Discard effects can come in if they're trying to disrupt your synergy. And I don't know. Maybe we are just severely underrating it, because I don't know about you, Mardu Sacrifice, not my jam. I can't play like 500 games of it. I'm usually over it after 10 games. But the success of like streamers like Crokies was really into Sacrifice early on with Mayhem Devil and Cat Oven. Ash Lizzle still plays it all the time too. Like, these archetypes have a huge fan base, and they have proven that putting in the work with these can unlock, like, even like, you can master these synergies more than most, which, I mean, I wish I loved it more, because that kind of thing is fun in Magic. So this might be one of those decks that just gets better and better with mastery, and maybe we are just underrating it because we haven't put in the reps.
Yep. Agree with everything you said. A few points I want to note. I think that people have been messing around with the Steel and Sack lists, and I think by and large those lists are mostly memes.
Oh, I did a video on it. It might be my fault, but yeah, mostly meme. Trying to pretend like Claim the Firstborn still exists.
I was just going to say, I mean, speaking of rotation, we just don't have a Claim the Firstborn anymore, and it's really highlighting how good that card was and how the rest of these cards are basically just limited cards. So yeah, unless they give us another like that power level of card, I don't think that plan is going to be particularly good. And we don't even have stuff like the Akroan War, right? Which is like another kind of funky backdoor way that you can get into a Steel and Sack plan.
So that card, that was a slow burn, but what a card!
Exactly.
That's one of those underrated. I remember when I reviewed that card, I was like, since we are talking rotation today, why not?
Yep.
When I reviewed that card, I was like, I can't tell if this is good or not. I have no idea. I read it like 4 times, and I'm still like, this might be great, and it might never see play. I really couldn't tell, and time kind of bore out that as the format went on and on, it got better and better.
Yep. So, sweet card. We don't have it here. So, yeah, Steel and Sack is probably just not going to work. And I've said this before, Crafty's on the show, but I'll say it again. I really, in my opinion, I don't think that the bulk of the work in this archetype is going to get done by the Immerstone Predator. Although CGB is looking like maybe he has a thought on that.
I mean, that card like carried my video on the Steel and Sack deck, even when I drew no steel effects. Like, okay, that card against green and white is a beating. It's an unbreakable wall. Now, against other decks, it's much more awkward, but it's also really good against Vanishing Verse and Blood on the Snow, as long as you can dodge the Kayas. But I mean, anyway, I recently had very good Immerstorm Predator experiences, but it sounds like you still haven't gotten there with that card.
I just haven't lost against it, man. I mean, that's like I've beaten it with mono green. I've beaten it with Simic. Obviously, it's pretty bad against Simic.
Yeah, really bad there. Really bad against
yeah,
Divide by Zero. Really bad.
Yep, pretty bad scene. It's also just small, right? It seems like it's big, but against a really big planet, it ends up being pretty small. And then there are also some matchups where like you just actually don't want to be sacking all your creatures, right? Like against, like for example, sometimes mono green goes pretty wide. And if you're just like sacking away all of your creatures, it can be kind of a problem. So I found that card to be slow and a little bit not particularly impactful. But again, I've always been a critic of the card. So I suppose it could just be confirmation bias that like I win against it and I'm like, ha, yeah, see, you suck. But in my mind, I guess I'm searching for like the ideal speed of format or the ideal style of format for a card like Immerstorm Predator, and I guess I just don't feel like we have it.
Understood. I don't know if it would make the cut in the ideal Rakdos list. I think that you're using most of the treasure effects you would have in the Blood on the Snow, the other Blood Money Kaya deck, right? You're using all that early game. Now you get Kalane, so you're incentivized to play some creatures because you can make them big. Now you should play Goldspan Dragon because you're a deck in 2022 that has red. So if you're not doing that, you're probably doing it wrong. And then it's like, well, what are we supposed to, what else do we do? There's usually like 8 more spots. Tybalt Valky is good, but it's really slow, and it's kind of hard to just be able to stick that in a spot where it takes over the game because it's hard to defend. Orcus is super mana intensive, and I think what I've learned most about Orcus is that it's a good card, but Blood on the Snow is the better version of it because you get the board wipe and the creature, whereas with Orcus, like you wipe all your things and you're left with the 5/3 trample sometimes. It's kind of and you have to pay life. So I don't know. Rakdos, I don't know what to fill that Rakdos deck out with that makes it good against everything. It has the nut draws for sure, where you just drop dragon and win. But like I said before, you play too long and you see the fails. You feel the fails more than you feel the big epic openings.
Yep. And like I said before, the only times I really feel like a dog to that deck are when they get their turn 3 avatar down. Otherwise, I just haven't really struggled against it. And not that
many even play that. Like it's kind of a feature of the Mardu deck, but not a lot of Rakdos lists go there. The ones without Showdown, kind of strange. Maybe a rebuild is required again. But man, does that card misclaim. You already said that, but it's true.
It's so true, and I think that's one of the really interesting things about the Mardu colors in general is that you look down the list and there are so many strong cards. It's not a combo that is in search of powerful cards. I mean, you can do all of these different builds, and they all have strong top ends, and I mean they all have solid plans, right? And it's just there's something about that configuration which in my opinion is just not quite getting it done over the other options.
The smaller mid-range deck perhaps is a saying that the competitive community uses to say you're doing good stuff in the middle of the game, but it's not the best stuff in the middle of the game.
Yep. And I think you highlighted a really good point, which is that there are just some really go over the top cards in this format, like Blood on the Snow. Some of the green rampy stuff just goes way over the top. Even just a really solid Is It Dragons opening can go way over the top of this deck. So I think you're right. It even though it has access to very big board affecting plays and lots of mana, it somehow just still ends up feeling a little small ball.
Yeah, I would. You can definitely mythic. It's another case of very strong cards. You can mythic with Rakdos, but I wouldn't tier it because I just don't know what's better than Mardu. I would probably tier 2 and maybe knock on that tier 1 door if I put in the reps. I believe more in the deck with Showdown of the Scalds for card advantage, and that really takes advantage of Extus. I believe a lot more in that deck than I do Rakdos.
Yep. Yeah, and I think you nailed it where like when people like Paulo Vitor or Autumn Burchett or like some of these really just like super big brain players put their mind to it, they could probably really come up with some very devastating builds of the deck. Not that we couldn't, but I just think that that's often what it takes to get a deck like that really big in the meta, is to have like some really big brain player put in a lot of time, and just really fill it out properly. So maybe we'll see that in the upcoming metas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The comments are gonna roast me if I don't mention it, but Paulo did put out a video playing Mardu Sacrifice.
Like, so there you go.
Yeah, it is on his channel, PVDDR on YouTube.
Nice. So yep. So he's already thinking about it, already putting his stamp of approval on it. Another deck I wanted to just ask you about was, you mentioned like a Teemo ramp deck, and I've seen this going around, some other people having similar ideas. Where do you put that deck? Like, do you think that deck is tier? Do you think it's better than the Simic one? Do you think it's worse than the Simic one?
I think it's a case of two decks doing very similar things, one with one with better matchups here or there, and the other with better matchups elsewhere. You trade off a little bit of your mana security for a more resilient game plan against decks packed with removal, because you're a spell-based deck. Your win cons all like draw more cards and grind through somebody who's planning to vanishing versus your big thing and win. But it's going to do a lot worse because it doesn't have like board wipe attached to body, aka Cyclone Summoner, against the decks that are just spamming the board. It has to draw Battle of Frost and Fire. Battle of Frost and Fire has to kill everything, which isn't always how Battle of Frost and Fire works. There's nothing worse than when you're up against the party deck, you play your Battle of Frost and Fire, but they have like 2 changelings left, and they untap and play their squad commander and their Arc Priest, and they're on full party again, you know? It's really embarrassing.
Yeah, probably doesn't line up well against Limbala either.
So I think it's a case of, I don't know how to separate the decks when thinking about tiering them, because they both want to do the same things. They want to ramp in the mid game, take over in the late game. Simic is going to do great against decks that are vulnerable to Cyclone Summoner or have a particular vulnerability to Coma, and the Teemo ramp deck is going to do great against people who are sitting on removal spells and hoping to interact with your key piece on a 1-for-1 basis. It's two sides of the same coin.
That's true that like having a spell-based finisher is really a different thing in this format, because a lot of people aren't really prepared for that. It's one of the reasons why I actually liked the Crackle with Power plan, right? It's a plan that most people aren't ready for. It's the kind of plan that only control really consistently disrupts. And as we've seen, control is just not really a thing in the format. So I like that distinction a lot. Okay, cool. Well, we could, of course, talk about more decks, but I think that was a good lineup, and I'm feeling pretty excited to get to the main topic here. So, rotation. Oh man, so many words have been said already about this ridiculous format, but I do think that as we show the door to some of these powerful sets, with Eldraine being at the top of the list, I do think there is a lot to learn. And just as a preface to all of this, I have had incredible fun playing with a lot of these cards that we're gonna kind of rake over the coals here.
Yep.
And I know that you have as well, CGB.
Yes, I have. Lots of memories were made.
Yep.
Could I do some stage dressing?
Please do.
Oh my gosh. It was just 2 years ago, man. It was 2 years ago. Arena had launched. The world was a very different place. And there was a lot of talk that this new client was going to conquer the world. Finally put Hearthstone in its place as the inferior card game that the nerds, all the Magic nerds always said it was, and that this new client was just going to change everything. And I remember I was at PAX when they played the trailer for War of the Spark, and just the intermingling between kind of a modern, almost music video feel and the lore and what was to come in Magic was so exciting. And Wizards R&D took on this moment in time where I feel like they really had an opportunity to take Magic to the next level by releasing some of the most powerful cards in history. And it really started in War of the Spark, and M20 was insanely powerful for a core set, but those sets rotated last year and they've kind of flown away. But what they left in their wake was the fall set, Eldraine, which maybe one of the most powerful, overpowered sets given the context of its time, but definitely in the absence of War in the Spark and M20, when those rotated, like the biggest shadow a fall set could ever cast. Just complete dominance by one pile of cards that we just saw again and again. And so many cards were banned. So many tournaments were played in this format because Arena was new. And since its release, Eldraine has been legal in every format on Arena. And that has been true, like every competitive format, best of 3 format on Arena. And it will be true until September when rotation happens. And then we will have our first competitive format without Eldraine on MTG Arena since its release. And it has just, it can't be stated enough. It has taken over every format. Historic and standard have just been dominated by these cards. And so many things have been banned, and so many things could have been banned. So I don't think it's possible to overhype this rotation. This is the biggest rotation in Arena's history for sure. It's one of the biggest of all time. The only thing I kind of want to compare it to Kaladesh, because Kaladesh was very powerful, but I don't remember it being that bad. I can compare it to Mirrodin.
Yes,
Affinity was broken. Yeah,
that's it. Affinity was broken. I also think there was that rotation where it was what? It was like blue devotion and black devotion. What was that?
That was the first Theros. I didn't feel like it was close. Maybe you have a different opinion of that time, but I was pretty happy with Magic at the time. I was excited for rotation, but not pissed at devotion, you know?
I wasn't playing during that time. I've just heard that was kind of a legendarily codified standard where, you know, we had some stuff that was just head and shoulders above the rest. But I mean, I'll take your word for it because, you know, I wasn't playing. So, yeah, I mean, I think that this is, if not the biggest rotation ever, then probably number 2. And regardless, it's kind of like, you know, I don't know. It's like comparing Ronaldo to Ronaldinho or whatever. You know what I mean? It's just
Jordan versus LeBron versus Kobe, man. Who was the most overpowered in their time. But I don't think any set has cast a shadow the way that Eldraine has. And I think a big reason for that, to be honest, Arena, it's hard to remember this now, but you used to have to go out and get an opponent to play Magic or download Magic online.
Yep.
You used to have to shuffle cards between games if you went to the local game store and played F&M once a week, and you'd spend all week like reading articles and thinking of tech of how you would go win your local F&M or your local PTQ or your qualifier, and that was your engagement with Magic. And MTG Arena put like it put Magic like in front of you every day. And we know from our survey that our users play Magic Arena a ton. I think more games of this format and with Eldraine legal have been played than with any set before it.
Anything
in
else.
history.
I agree. I agree.
So when we say we're sick of Bone Crusher Giant and Embercleave, it's because never in the history of the game have this many of those cards been cast. Not
CGB,
close.
This raises an interesting question for me. Do you think that Embercleave has ended more games of Magic than any other card in Magic's history?
Oh.
Maybe Lightning Bolt takes that cake?
No, I don't think so. I honestly think that we don't have the stats, but I think the exponential growth you would see in games. I mean, just think of what it took to sit down and play a game in paper. Think of the shuffling, think of the cutting decks. Think of just how much more people like engage either in banter or in contemplation in paper. And then compare it to the average length of an arena game, which I can tell you when playing aggro is 4 to 6 minutes. And you're like, boom, right back into the next one. I think you're right. I think Embercleave has probably ended more games of Magic than any card in history.
It would be really interesting to look at the numbers. And if that's the case, I mean, we just have to give it up for that card. But I feel like first, perhaps what would be great to do with Eldraine in particular is to take it chronologically, because we've just had like the many eras of Eldraine.
We did.
Right?
We did.
So let's rewind all the way back to the beginning. Week 1 of Eldraine. And one of the first things that became eerily apparent to everyone was that this weird planeswalker, this weird Oko planeswalker that no one quite knew what to make of, everyone thought it had something going on. Very few people suspected that it would end up going on to be the best Planeswalker of all time. So, but it didn't take very long for people playing Standard to start going like, wow, this card is, wow, okay, hold on, this card's actually really pretty good. And so one of the first iterations of that Standard format was that we were seeing these decks built around Gilded Goose. There was like this holy trifecta of Gilded Goose, Once Upon a Time, and Oco.
If I may, I prepared to talk about Oco. I looked up the first video I released the day Eldraine became legal, and it was the very first game I played with Eldraine legal. Turn 1, Once Upon a Time, Gilded Goose. Next turn, Oco Thief of Crowns. And I went on to win that game after misplaying so horribly because I had no idea what to do with the card, but everything I did just got me further ahead by so much it didn't matter. It's a really funny rewatch to do. I played terribly, and it wasn't close. It was an insane thing to watch.
Yeah. I've heard even top level pro players relate that exact story of like, cast Oco on 2, had no idea what to do with it, won anyway, lol.
If Bottlebrush wants to put like the graphic here, or if anybody wants to find that video, the title is Food is Broken. Oco is Broco, new Standard deck.
Yep. So yeah, that deck was like, I think of that deck as like the ultimate mid-range deck, right? That was like, it was like a low curve aggro, somehow mid-range Planeswalker deck, right? Like it had that kind of just like take over the game instantly kind of early game.
Oh yeah.
But then it also had like a pretty much an unbreakable mid to late game as well.
I mean, it had a turn 2 threat that was a must answer, or it could take over the game from either position. If you're behind, you just keep neutralizing their threats or gaining life. And they have to keep attacking this thing that has infinite loyalty. If you're ahead, you just start beating them down with free 3/3s like every turn or every other turn. And if they play something that might start to stabilize their board and catch them up, you just steal it. That's fine. No big deal. Crazy.
So, and then of course, you know, crafties, maybe some of you weren't playing during that time, but we also had the Nissa Krasis combo in the same deck.
Oh.
And I mean, that was already, you know, Nissa and her jellyfish pet had been bullying metas for months and months and months. So when you just throw all of these cards together, and I'm trying to remember, was that a growth spiral deck as well?
At first it was questionable because it didn't really curve with Oco all the time, but it became one when Oco was gone easily. But yeah, you could play Growth Spiral in that deck if you wanted to go big quickly.
If you felt like it. Yeah, so I mean, it was really just like, if you go down the list, it was basically a list of like standard greatest hits, most versatile, money, devastating, face smashing cards ever.
Mm-hmm.
And
crazy. Just crazy.
So before we go on to that card being banned, let's just highlight a few of the other things that Oco did. Like, I don't know, take over every competitive format in Magic ever.
Yeah.
Like, it was basically, this is what I feel like happened. It basically bogged its way back in time, right? So quickly took over Standard. Then, you know, people tried it in Pioneer. It was apparent that it was just absolutely redonkulously busted in that format. And then they were like, well, all right, Modern. Here's the Modern format. Is it good? Yep. Yes, it is insanely good in Modern. Legacy, just no problem. And then even frickin' Vintage, CGB, the Force of Will format.
Yeah.
We had like, what was it like?
To Force of Will. It's a good deal.
There you go. I mean, I think it was like within the month, someone was winning a Vintage tournament by attacking with like a Black Lotus that had been Oco'd.
A viral clip was an Elked Black Lotus attacked for lethal to win the Vintage, I believe it was the Vintage Championship, which is kind of an underground thing at this point. They don't really publicize it, but there you go.
And that is probably about as magic as Richard Garfield intended it as possible. So
Here's the Oco Thief of Crowns list. Standard, banned. Pioneer, banned. Modern, banned. Legacy, banned. Brawl, banned. Historic, banned. Legal in Commander, legal in Vintage.
as a one of, right?
In Vintage?
Or is it just
is
a,
it
a
restricted
regular
in
four of?
Vintage? It just says legal. It just
Yeah.
says legal. I'm not sure.
So basically banned in like basically everywhere ever. I mean, this guy is like, this is Oko. Oko's like that guy that just gets thrown out of every single bar he's ever walked into.
Oh,
And
yeah.
there's just it's just like a long list of wanted signs trailed behind him. I mean, he's like Loki, is what he is.
He was meant to be this way, yeah.
Yeah.
He was meant to cause trouble from the beginning. So,
Yeah.
what do you think we learned from Oco Thief of Crowns as far as evaluating cards? Because I think one of the interesting stories about Oco is how there were a lot of people who were just not excited about this card. I rated it. I think I rated it as my number. It was either my number one. I think it was my number 2 card in the set. It was either my number 1 or number 2. Gosh, I should find that article for fun. But while I do that, what did we learn from Oco?
Okay, so the first thing we learned from Oko was just that low cost, high loyalty planeswalkers are dangerous. So that was one thing that they really tested the waters with. Like, for example, the Royal Scions was another planeswalker which had that same templating. Now, that planeswalker ended up being basically unplayable. So they didn't, they didn't choose the right modes on that planeswalker necessarily. But if you ever played against it, you can still remember that feeling of like, oh God, it's just going to take so much work to get the stupid thing off the battlefield. And in the meantime, it's doing whatever it's doing, right? So Oko was really it just had too much loyalty. So that was the first thing that we learned from Oko. I think the next thing that we learned from Oko, and unfortunately, it was basically the skull clamp problem, right? Where something that we think of as being a potential downside actually ends up being an upside. So I think the idea with Oko was that, well, we can elk our opponent's stuff, but then they get a 3/3 that can attack Oko. And it's kind of a cool idea when you think about it, like a planeswalker which neutralizes your opponent's threat, but then gives your opponent's like answers to the planeswalker. Not a bad idea. I think they just underrated how bad a vanilla 3/3 is in modern Magic and how good everything else was.
Yeah.
And the fact that Oko could just, I don't know, neutralize your opponent's great henge, neutralize your opponent's big legendary creature, neutralize your opponent's whatever the problem was, they neutralized it.
It feels like invalidated everything. Everything that wasn't Oko or another planeswalker like Nissa. Planeswalkers were one of the things Oko couldn't hit. Enchantments were a thing that Oko couldn't hit. But just kind of unreal how many things just didn't matter with Oko Thief of Crowns on the board.
Yeah. So, okay.
Can I also throw this one in? Maybe we learned that now that we made this push planeswalker that just cranks everything into a vanilla 3/3, maybe we learned that just having players bounce vanilla 3/3s off each other isn't fun.
Yep. That is very true, my friend. That is very true. Yeah, it's hard to describe. I almost feel like formats with Oko felt like they were wearing sumo suits,
Yeah.
Where it's just like all of these like thick board states just chest bumping until someone eventually falls over.
Not a bad analogy. I've got, 2 quick things on Oko. Number 1, first of all, I had it as my number 2 card in the set. Good job. I would ask you to guess the number 1, but it's too embarrassing, so I'm just going to reveal it. I had Murderous Rider as the number 1 card in the set.
A lot of people rated that card highly. And let's be real. I mean, in some previous standards, that really would have been a top shelf card.
And it went on to see almost no play because tempo became everything and answers became so much worse than threats. Yep. All right. Other thing. Question. You said it earlier like it was definitive. I feel like we at least need to give it some words. Is Oko the greatest planeswalker of all time?
Easily. easily the greatest Planeswalker of all time.
I think you're right. I just don't think another Planeswalker comes close. And gosh, we only had it in standard for what, 2-3 months, and man, it could have been so much worse.
I mean, I'm wondering when, and I don't think it is as far out as you might think, Crafties. I'm wondering when Jace the Mind Sculptor is coming to Historic.
Just reprint it in standard. It might just be a standard card now.
I mean,
it's
how the mighty have
man.
fallen, right? I mean, it was once banned from Modern. They brought it back. No one cared.
Jumpstart Historic Horizons. Just throw Jace in there. See what happens. Who cares?
I wouldn't put it past him, and I wouldn't put it past Jace to be not actually that good in Historic.
Because, I mean, yeah, Oco and Jace were both legal in multiple formats, and you know who won? You know who's banned? Oco. Yeah. I don't think there's real competition. I think you're right. They printed the best Planeswalker of all time on MTG Arena. Crazy.
And actually, I don't know. Number 2 is probably like some tie between maybe Ren and 6, which is an incredible Planeswalker, and maybe Teferi Time Raveler. I mean, if we're being honest, that card, what a banger that ended up being.
Also got banned.
Yep. Anyway, okay, well, so that was the first wave. We had a famous Pro Tour that was just completely crapped all over by Oco. That happened. So now let's fast forward to the banning. Now I'm trying to remember what they banned. It was Oco and Once Upon a Time, I think, were banned at the same time.
I believe it was a little bigger than that. I believe that. Okay, I've got November 18th, 2019, the end of the line, and in standard, Oco is banned. Once Upon a Time is banned, which we didn't even really cover, but just that card should never exist. Maybe we can cover our lessons from Once Upon a Time. But they also banned Veil of Summer.
Veil of Summer. Mm-hmm. That's the other one. Yep, which was another just M20 totally broken card. But we don't need to talk about that because that was a previous rotation.
Yep.
So yeah, Once Upon a Time, let's just talk briefly about the problem with that card. I mean, free spells, busted. Yeah. That's just generally the way it goes in Magic. I think that the design team idea was that the other 3 end up going to be like being not particularly great in your deck. And I think what they underestimated was just how that just really doesn't matter when you get to do your busted start. Right?
Yeah.
So for me, that's what we learned is that like if the fail case of your card, if the bad version of your card is basically invalidated by what like just having it in your opening hand does for you, then you haven't tweaked the dials properly.
I have a theory that Once Upon a Time was the answer to a problem that they've never solved well, which is that they were rotating the shock lands and the check lands. Mana bases were awesome. They really were. And they weren't reprinting a good fix. Eldraines for dual lands, got Fabled Passage. And Pathways were a ways away. Triomes were still yet to come. So the mana bases got really ugly there for a little while. And they were going to get uglier because, what was it? Was it the check lands that were still in one of the core sets? It's hard to remember exactly. But basically, mana got a lot worse. Which threatened to ruin, it always threatens to ruin standard because standard is defined by what you can do with mana. So they printed 2 cards, and we'll get to the other one, but one of them is definitely Once Upon a Time, where I think they tried to add consistency to mana base so that you could run like a 2-color aggro deck with 4 dual lands and not another 4 dual lands, which is kind of the threshold you need for that consistency, that enter the battlefield untapped so you can play aggressive cards and play things early. And they tried to replace all that with this innocuous green card called Once Upon a Time. You can imagine a world where green-white counters, a deck that had so many cards printed for it, but never took off because there were just too many times where you had to start on Temple of Plenty and you never got traction in the game. There's a world where Once Upon a Time enables a deck like that to curve out strong and powerful.
Yeah.
The problem is they just, if it's not the most busted start you can be doing, it makes finding that busted start so powerful that everybody needs to play the deck with the busted start. Because there's just no other decent answer to turn 1 Goose, turn 2 Oko, or whatever the next best thing is after Oko gets banned. And let's be honest, that level of consistency, your opponent having the nut draw every game, that's not fun. That takes so much of what's fun right out of Magic. I just remember that the London Mulligan came along, and that's another topic that we could touch on in this whole discussion that made things more consistent. And the strategy at Pro Tour Oko, where Oko was 69% of the meta, nice, is like Mulligan until you can turn to Oko or answer it or do something better. And just going to 5. I think the finals had like, I remember a match between like Strosky and Paulo Vitor Domitrosa on Sunday where they're just both mulliganing lower and lower, but it's like all that matters is that your turn 1 Goose, turn 2 Oko, and Once Upon a Time makes it possible to mulligan for it. So why wouldn't you?
Yep. Also, just how obnoxious was it to like, you know, you're like taking your first turn and you're on the play and your opponent already has stick. How obnoxious was that, dude?
I have scooped turn 1 games of Historic Brawl to that. It's just not fair. It's not fair.
It's just not cool,
it's just
dude.
Not fair.
Not cool. So
I'm straight up gone. I'm out. There's stick, and I know they have Once Upon a Time, and my hand looks awkward, and I'm out. I'm not entertaining this.
You're like, this is how this story ends. Once Upon a Time, the end.
Once Upon a Time, bye.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so that era ended, and then it left this huge sucking power vacuum. And there was this fun period. I actually remember that was a pretty fun period to be playing on Arena because, so what were people trying out? I think the next big deck that really came in was Fires of Invention.
Yep. But Fires and Sacrifice and Nissa Krasis stuff was still very popular, and those cards, those decks were like slugging it out for a while.
And it took us a while. I think it took everyone a while to A, of all, realize how strong Fires of Invention was, and B, of all, actually make the deck, right? And again, this was a deck that was enabled by some very, very powerful cards from M20 in the form of Cavalier of Redness. What was that one called?
Sure, Redness.
The Cavalier of Red
Cavalier
to the face.
of Flame.
Okay, yep. And it actually for a while played the blue Cavalier as well, although that one eventually got phased out.
Cavalier of Gales. Yep.
That's right. So it was just kind of interesting because I think that card was kind of like Wilderness Reclamation, where we all knew it was busted and we just didn't know quite how to actually break it in half. And I actually remember, was it Martin User? It might have been Martin User who came up with the original Fires Cavalier deck.
The pro story of it is that Martin User at the time was, I believe, staying at the Czech house with Andrei Strosky, Stanislav Sivka, who have innovated such things as Kethis combo in the past. Very, very, and this was very recent. Like this was August of the same year that had happened. So they're pretty high on innovation and a very respected deck building team. And yeah, they debuted the Fires of Invention deck. I think it was shortly after those Oko bans, and I remember it because I was playing in a Fandom Legends, and I saw this deck and literally grabbed it the night before and just sleeved it up and went for it. And results were varied, but I believe I beat world champion Javier Dominguez in a mirror. So
there you go.
I'll take that one with me. Thank you. Check, please. We don't have to talk about the rest of that tournament. Didn't go well. But I definitely learned that I didn't know how to play or sequence Fires of that deck well. It actually took reps to get good at, and it took understanding what was important. And it was another deck that you just mulligan till you have what you need. And I think what was really telling about that deck, the more you played it, the more you were like, well, we need like 30 lands. We can just never miss a land because it doesn't matter what we draw as long as we draw Fires, enough lands to cast it, and 1 or 2 Cavaliers. You know, that was it. And it was kind of crazy that the way things went, we were just raising the land count because lands were just better than anything else we could pack into the deck because of the way it played out and acted like a combo deck for turn 5.
Well, and again, it just highlights the fact that, like, who cares about flooding when our A plan just freaking kills them so often, right?
So often.
It's like, and then the sweet thing about that deck was that your B plan is probably just like top deck a Cavalier and freaking pump some mana into it and swing in with haste anyway. So it actually had some pretty solid kind of, one of the cool things about that deck was that it just played so many haymakers that if the game went late, you were so dangerous off the top of your deck, right?
Yeah. Any time that you were in turns 6, 7, 8, and the opponent had land, it was like they'll just play Cavalier Flame or Kenrith and kill me. Yeah. Like there's just a giant haste monster coming at you every turn. Good luck. Yeah.
Yep. Exactly. So those were the best versions of the deck at the time. However, it's kind of like, I feel like there have been almost as many builds of Fires as there have been builds of Yorion. And if CGB had slightly different branding, you might have made like the 12 days of Fires of Invention. But regardless,
banned, man.
Say again.
If it hadn't been banned, maybe.
It hadn't been banned, right? Exactly. But I remember Gruul versions, which were playing that trampler thing that made more tramplers. That was a fun thing that was going on for a while. People, when Ikoria came out, people were trying these Fires decks that played a number of ultimatums. That was some fun nonsense to be doing.
But do you remember what got it banned?
Yes, I do. Featuring another freaking M20 card. The world's most hated double agent. Yes. Agent
of Treachery.
Which, okay, so Agent of Treachery was kind of like the Alrund's epiphany of the day. Everyone hated it. It was a groaner. It, was just frequently showing up in these really annoying decks. Like Alrund's epiphany, it was kind of a slow burn that just kind of kept on picking up momentum. But it didn't reach the actual fever pitch until the deck which Danny T. Law still swears that he brewed, which was what was the official name of it? Luca Fires?
I feel like if it had come around in like the 2000s, it would have a name, like something like brutal. It would be like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a good one, but like Batista Throat Punch or something.
Yeah, exactly.
It would have some kind of a bizarre name.
Blue bowling ball or something. Yeah.
oh, sure.
But yeah, I mean, this was basically like, it was like a Ponza deck disguised as a mid-range deck. That's basically what it was.
That is so boomer. I'm here for it. So Ponza is a land destruction mid-range deck in an older format, and you're using that reference because the whole deck's design is to cheat Agent of Treachery into play, but you usually end up stealing land.
Yep. Yeah. And it was just, I mean, man, that deck was so brutal.
It had to go. It was too good.
That was quite literally one of the most rage-inducing decks I've ever played against.
And it was the most popular deck by a mile. You played that, or you played mono red and tried to kill it before it could do anything. It polarized the meta so much. You could not control it. Like, you could not play a slow game against it. It ran 4 copies of Teferi Time Raveler, the ultimate control beater. But aside from that, every card in it was a banger. You couldn't stop them all.
Dude, let's list some of them off. So that deck played Teferi Time Raveler. It played Nosset Potter of Veils.
Yeah.
Yorion, of course, the Sky Noodle himself. It's probably the best Yorion deck ever by a mile.
Yep.
Fires of Invention. Agent of Treachery. It did play Luca Coppercoat Outcast, which, while has never been remotely as good as it was in that deck, has still showed up in some pretty strong decks, cheating out kind of lesser threats like Coma, for example.
It has to crap. Like, it wouldn't be this podcast if you didn't take a dump on Coma when you could. One of the two of the unheralded cards, I think you mentioned Elspeth Conqueror's Death. It's hard to remember now how great ECD was when it could get back to Fairy and Narset. Like, getting those back was just broken. because they were such low opportunity cost, and you had to get them off the board or they ruin so many strategies. But if they just get it back with their ECD, it's so hard to play around it. Like, I hold up a counterspell. Cool. I get back to Fairy, and now I do my combo. It was so nasty. But another card in that deck that was completely underrated was Shark Typhoon, which lets you completely cheat on Fires of Invention, because you can still do stuff on the opponent's turn. You can play around counter magic, generate epic threats that like will kill them, so they can't just hold up their mana forever. Shark Typhoon is another card that was a little bit of a slow burn, and not everybody was excited for, but another card that's rotating that people are probably might be tired of. I'm okay with it, but man, is that card a
Shark
killer.
Typhoon is that card is such a bummer, man. That card is a mellow harsher, man. I think once that card is gone, only then will people start to understand just how amazing it was, especially in control matchups. Just the ultimate control killer, really.
Yeah, like games without it now are so much different in Standard 2022. Yeah. It's one of those things where you don't realize it's missing until the opponent passes without doing anything, and you're like, oh crap, Shark Typhoon, wait a minute. I don't have to play around an uncounterable flash blocker here. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So that deck was just unbelievably filthy, right?
Yeah.
So that was kind of the plot arc of Fires of Invention. So Kovako Blue, what did we learn from Fires of Invention?
Fires of Invention is the other card I alluded to that I believe tried to fix some of the mana problems that the new format would face by giving mid-range decks this card that they could play, and then they don't have to worry about complicated mana costs anymore. And with Ikoria coming up, the idea of playing an ultimatum without having to have perfect mana in a format with difficult mana, that's kind of appealing, you know? And I think it was designed a lot for that purpose, as well as some combo decks that never really came together. But there are a lot of neat things you can do with Fires of Invention. I think we learned, like, 4 mana and the single red cost, it's just...
The single red, that was a killer.
It's just too cheap and too easy to play in anything. And I think that Wilderness Reclamation taught us the same story. Mana doublers, no matter how sneaky they are, it's just too brutal. It's too exploitable. Maybe we also learned that enchantments, just not every deck is a setup to deal with or beat enchantments, so they're actually hard to remove. So when you play a mana doubling enchantment on 4 and then find any way to basically have 10 mana available on turn 5, you win that game, and the opponent feels, while you might feel like you absolutely did everything, the opponent feels like there was no game played. And Fires of Invention was part of just exploiting that, in my opinion. Just absolutely ramping that up to 11.
Absolutely. And I mean, if you think about some of the bonkers decks that we've seen, like these Niv Mizzet Reborn decks, for example, you know, these 5-color Fires decks, it just really highlights the versatility of that card and the greed. Basically, for me, I think it's one of the greediest cards I've ever seen printed, because if you just lay out some of those deck lists, man, I mean, it's like more 5-drops than you've ever seen, you know? Certainly in a standard deck.
An appeal to the kind of the Timmy Magic player who just wants to play all their powerful stuff and not worry about their mana or the other things like that, or the kind of, as you say it, being a grown-up about your mana base. Like, we just threw that out the window for a little while and let Timmy have the fun. The thing is, that takes away a lot of what people love about Magic. Solving those puzzles, while it can be constraining, is also a lot of what breeds creativity that feels rewarding. And I think that the creativity in Fires of Invention ran out quickly. I want to ask you something about Fires of Invention. Think about it after the last fall rotation, with Eldraine now being the oldest set in the format, and what we have. Would Fires of Invention still have been broken? Did it need to be banned? Without Agent of Treachery, and without a lot of the things that rotated, and with a companion tax, like, what would a Fires deck be like now? Would it be busted?
I mean, people would find a way, right?
Yeah.
I think we'd just have whatever the best. You know, maybe it would end up being some kind of an interesting Gruul deck or something, you know?
Interesting for a minute.
A minute.
The first time you see it, you're like, cool. And then a month later, you're like, good riddance.
I mean, okay, CGB. Can you imagine the combination of Fires of Invention and Alrund's Epiphany? Just let that one sit for a moment.
Yeah, I'm over it.
He's already over it, and so am I.
I'm good. Moving
So,
on.
yep. Okay. So now, as I remember it, while Fires was on its ascension and its inevitable decline, another card, which was just it was a slow burn, which turned into a fever pitch and then became a full-on blaze, Embercleave. And this is what I remember, Covert Go Blue. Tell me how you remember it, but this is how I remember it, is that I just remember playing the ladder and playing against some stupid Gruul deck. I remember people were really trying to make Gruul work all throughout this standard, and the mana was terrible. And they were still just trying it anyway. And you had these memers playing cards like Barkhide Troll in their Gruul decks and stuff like that. I mean, just awful stuff. But I remember losing once to Embercleave and being like, whoa, that was unexpected. I just took like 14 damage in one turn. Damn. All right, whatever. And then I lost to it again. And I was like, wow, that sucked for me. Damn. Maybe this meme card is actually something. I feel like it took a while for it to become like having that like dreaded pit feeling in the pit of your stomach, like, oh god, they have Embercleave, I'm going to lose another game. How did it happen for you?
Aggro was pronounced dead. Mono red was pronounced dead when the rotation happened because Oko just like had its way with it. And then even after that, they had to deal with Krasis, Nissa, Cat Oven, which we'll talk about later. Aggro was pronounced dead. And then there was that Rakdos deck, which, and you said, and Gruul as well, but the Rakdos deck, I think, was around just before that because Oko was still legal at the time when this first showed up. And, or no, it was Mardu Knights. That's what it was.
Mardu Knights.
It was Kenuka Hero.
Nonsense.
It was Mardu Knights, but it had Rotting Regisaur and Embercleave.
Yeah.
And I remember watching the coverage of that event, and Ken Yukihiro got featured because he was one of the few people with a winning record without Oko in their deck in the room. And I just remember, okay, he untapped with Rotting Regisaur. Here he comes. Here comes the Embercleave. And oh, they're dead.
16 damage to the face.
Yeah. Very impressive. And that the card definitely went on to become the hope of aggro. There was a period of time, because I track these things every day. I follow like what's doing it in best of one ladder. And a Rakdos Rotting Regisaur Knights deck with Embercleave like rose to the most played deck on the Arena best of one ladder. It was the most represented. And that is where you kind of knew that you had that this card had kind of a Splinter Twin vibe with anything with enough power to really bust through. It feels like around 4, 5, 6 is where you start taking too much of a hit from Embercleave to survive. You can count on your early spells to get in about 10. If you get another 10 from an Embercleave, they're probably done. We also saw those builds being like, forget burn spells. Hell, forget removal spells. All creatures. Because having enough creatures to make your Embercleave cheap was not a thing. It was the thing. Yeah.
Well, it's one of the reasons why Bone Crusher was so good, right? Is that it did double duty. It filled out that, early removal. And of course, in the mid game, the removal didn't matter as much because you were probably just slamming them in the face with Embercleave. So, yep. That was, and I think that Embercleave just kept getting better. Like, this is my memory of Embercleave. I mean, of course, when Theros came out and then we had like the real God deck with Anax. And that now remind me, was there a time when we had access to Anax and Light Up the Stage and Steamkin? And like,
in Historic,
was that a deck that was possible?
No, not in Standard.
No, not in
right?
Standard. Okay, so we didn't have both of those.
Or was it?
I don't remember how the rotation worked.
Oh, no, War of the Spark was legal. Yeah, I think that, that did last from Theros, from when Theros came out in the spring until the fall of 2020, right? Yeah, okay. That was possible.
I think that there was a period where we had such greatest hits as So we had Runaway Steamkin, we had Light Up the Stage, we had Annex. What was the one drop lizard? The face
Scorch
burning
Spitter.
one. Scorch Spitter. Yep.
I'm not
CGB's
enjoying
favorite
this.
one drop.
This isn't fun. We have to talk about these cards.
And of course, Torbran, Embercleave. I mean, this deck is just like, it has to be one of the most ferocious mono red decks that has ever existed in history. In fact, this deck was so good. It was so good that it made notable mid-range player Seth Manfield. Seth Manfield is like the Golgari Sultai mastermind, right?
And Seth loves mono red.
And it turned him, is what I'm saying. The deck turned him, you know? It was another one of these decks that just bogged into him. It touched him, and then it like assimilated into his arm, and then it was all over.
Okay, flex moment. I had a conversation with Seth Manfield, world champion, about this, and Seth has always loved and tried to get mono red there for tournaments. He tries almost every time, and it just doesn't get there, but this one did.
Heck yeah. And he was playing at the World Championships, and he had a very deep run as well.
Oh, yeah.
By the way, if you ever want a masterclass in how to play an aggressive deck, watch some of those videos of him playing the deck. The amount of restraint that he showed playing mono red was just unbelievable. There was some jaw-dropping turns, man.
Oh, come on. If the sword is lit, we legit. That is all you need to know. That is all you need to know about Embercleave.
I mean, we legit, but we don't win the world championship. That's for sure.
No, I agree with you fully. I just had to make that joke because it's a throwback to the Mono Red song, which was also a channel meme of mine that was inspired by this deck and this card, which, I mean, like some kind of Mono Red deck. I don't know if the War of the Spark version or the version with Annex and Embercleave was played more, but has to be the most played deck in the history of Magic because of how much people spam it on the arena ladder. It really is insane when you think about it. It was 20+% of the meta for years. Here's what I learned from Embercleave. You have to read the little words and the big ones. Or the short words and the long sentences. Like, you have to actually read the whole card. Because when you read the card, I remember this, I dismissed it along with the other mythic artifacts as silly. And you read the first word, flash. By the time that you're finished reading, when Embercleave enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control, you forgot it had flash. And by the time you finish reading, equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has double strike and trample, you forgot all the stuff before that. It's actually an interesting exercise in putting it all together, because Embercleave behaves nothing like what an equipment should. I mean, the second you read equipment, you have in your head a diagram of how this works. It's like an aura, but you don't lose value because you can move it. And auras were always best, like equipment was always best used on small creatures because you can always just replace the fodder and you want your stuff to be cheap. Embercleave does exactly the opposite. It does want you to have a lot of creatures, but it rewards you for getting it on something big. And like, the value isn't in using it turn after turn, although you can. The value is in surprise, motherfucker.
Yep.
And
you did.
Yeah, it's just the opposite of every equipment card we've ever run into. And if you tunnel vision on the equipment status, which is one of the first things you read, you have the wrong idea about the card the whole time. And if you forget while reading any part of the card about the rest of the card, it doesn't come together.
And I think in general, it's just got enough text on it where even to this day, I sometimes think I know exactly what Embercleave does, and I kind of forget exactly what it does. And that usually results in me dying.
Do you remember the first time you got Embercleaved on defense?
I don't remember it exactly.
Oh, I do.
I just remember dying a lot faster than I thought I was going to.
Oh, yeah. My Hydra Crisis wanted to get frisky and go for lethal, and then an Embercleave landed on a Robber of the Rich, and I was very sad.
With that stealth reach as well. Brutal. Just brutal. Yeah, so Embercleave needs no introduction, and frankly, it needs no send-off either. You know, don't let the door hit you on the way out, Embercleave. That's all I got to say to you. Bye, Felicia. Okay. So you hinted at it. Let's talk about it. Somewhere in the midst of all of this, people started putting together that when a cat loves an oven very much, magical things happen. This was another just like slow burn where it just took us months to really realize just how good that was.
I have a great story about this.
Okay, lay it on us.
It's early access Throne of Eldraine. Was there, like, if I could go play another day in my life, I think the first day, the early access, the streamer only event, an MPL invite event that happened one day on Twitch before the set went live. If I could go live in that day over and over, I gladly would. So I'm going to set the scene. I've already completed my stream and I'm tired as hell, but you just can't go to bed because you have access to these sponsored Wizards accounts that are stocked with all the cards for 24 hours. And at the end of 24 hours, you don't get it anymore. And it's got all these Eldraine cards and they're so weird and so cool. And there's so many unknowns. And I am one of the only cards I had played with prior is they had this event where you could play the Corvold Brawl deck like a week before the Eldraine thing got released. It was like a promotional thing they did for the Brawl commanders. And I remember thinking Corvold's really cool. It's a lot of card draw, right? And with Cat Oven, it's like card draw every turn. That sounds sweet. So it's like 4 o'clock in the morning. And I have a deck with Fabled Passage, Mayhem Devil, Cauldron Familiar, Witch's Oven, and Corvold on day 0, on day -1 of the format. So looking back, I'm feeling good about that. Also had Once Upon a Time, a little busted. And I queue up against Andrea Mengucci. Now, I'm going to admit to something that some people will say is bad. I opened up his stream. I did not look at his cards. This was about hearing his reactions. It wasn't about knowing what he was playing. So I had him on in a window, but I just wanted to hear that sweet Andrea Mengucci voice as I played my cards. That's all I wanted from it. And I have no regrets about that. Reminder, we are playing each other on stocked accounts for 24 hours for entertainment. There is nothing to win or lose here. There really isn't. And I would tell him about that, and I don't think he'd be mad. And if anybody wants to do that to me in such circumstances, I will understand. When we're literally not even on ladder. There's not even a rank to play for. Okay. So I play turn 1 Cat, and he just starts laughing. He's like some silly person playing that cat. It's such a silly card. And I play like turn 2 Oven. And over the next few turns, he's like, oh, this is very annoying. He's just doing this over and over. Somewhere in there, I get out a Mayhem Devil, and I think I kill like his Llanowar Elves. He's just like, what's going on? He plays a Fabled Passage and cracks it, triggers my Mayhem Devil, kills another one of his Llanowar Elves. He's like, oh, that is so, he like kind of gives me a clap. Then I drop a Corvold, draw about 15 cards, and he's just sitting there looking at the board going, what happened? What the hell happened? And then I think he said some kind of a curse word in Italian and conceded. and I'm like, I idolize Andrea Mengucci. He's a legend to me. So picking up a win felt good, but I was also like, okay, this isn't a meme. There is something broken in here with this Cat Oven sacrifice stuff. And to say it played out that way, it was annoying on day 1. Oh my gosh, this lasted for like a year.
Forever. Oh my God.
It's still going on in Historic.
I mean, it's probably the only thing. It's the only thing I got tired of to match Embercleave, to be honest. I think at the end of the day, if you line up the sheer frustration, Cat Oven is right up there.
It is. Invalidated any creature that didn't have flying or trample. Just didn't matter anymore. You could chump it forever. Invalidated burn as a strategy. Just gave easy, repeatable life gain that was accessible in combo form from turn 2 to any deck with black and Witch's Oven. Crazy. The combos with Corvold, Mayhem Devil, just like, oh my gosh, it kind of took combo to a new level in a different form. Like these sort of get these creatures together that have these interesting interactions. It never felt like it hit scale like this, where and now I take 15 actions in one turn cycle, kill your whole board, and draw 50 cards, or is what it felt like. And if you want to see that, check out Pyotr Glagowski and his winning. Just check out the last couple minutes of his match with Brad Nelson in the Mythic Championship. I think it's Mythic Championship 7, the one that he won, where he's just, Pyotr is an awesome character anyway, and he just takes like 15 million actions, does a billion things, draws a billion cards, kills all Brad's stuff, and Brad on his turn, I'm not kidding, a pro level event with like $50,000 on the line, just ropes him.
Yep. I remember that. That was amazing.
They're sitting right across from each other too. You know, they could peek around the monitor. Hey,
I love it.
And Brad shamelessly ropes him.
You see Brad sitting there, and his head's kind of down, and the monitor's just like blanking out his glasses, and you can't see his eyes, and he's just got this like cheeky smirk on his face, and you can tell he's just like, fluff your pillows, Pyotr Glagowski. Like, I'm so over you right now.
Dude, how many people do you think got hardcore roped on Arena because of Cauldron Familiar Witch's Oven?
Oh, God. Seriously. Yeah.
How much time, if you added it up? We're talking lifetimes, I bet.
Oh, man. And here's the thing is that it probably didn't even phase these like Cat Oven players because they take so much time. Oh, my God. They took so much time to take every game action, right?
Yeah, I think roping is just, we want some of our own. We want some our time.
Yeah, just give it back.
We're just trying to even the playing field, man. I watched you do this for like 20 minutes. I took like 5 minutes of game action. I'm getting a little bit back from you on the way out.
I mean, can you remember like spell on the stack, wait, rope, resolves, move to combat, wait, rope, declare attackers, wait, rope. Oh my God. And you couldn't even, so you got through combat and they did the whole cat oven-y thing or whatever. It wasn't even done. It wasn't even necessarily done. They might have some more cat ovening to do at the end of that turn if they had another oven. I mean, it was just, oh my God.
It's a big reason I don't play Historic. Yeah. It's a huge, I will tell you today, it's a huge reason I don't touch Historic. I just don't want to. I remember the last time I played Historic competitively was one of the qualifier events. And like I faced 3 cat oven decks in 4 rounds, and I could have probably battled out 2 of them, but after the first one, I was just over it, and I didn't want to play anymore. After the first one, I was just like, get me out of here. I don't care what I could win. It's not worth it. It's not worth it.
No, so I want my Saturday back.
I still hope it gets banned in Historic, so I might enjoy that format someday.
Yeah, and I mean, especially if like Dragon's Rage Chandler and all these kind of decks become really popular, I don't see Cat Oven going anywhere.
Mayhem Devil still sounds really good, yeah.
Still sounds pretty good, yeah.
What I learned, though, from Cauldron Familiar is that combos that look silly and like minute return are still really good when they're cheap. When they're insanely cheap. If Oven had been like a 3-mana card, maybe it still would have happened, but it would have been a totally different experience. If Cauldron Familiar went to hand instead of the battlefield and you had to pay a mana, it might have still been a thing at some points, but it wouldn't be broken. I think from now on, when somebody says, hey, I think there's a cool little combo between 1-mana card A and 1-mana card B, you have to pay attention. And that was something like I never would have gotten excited about Cauldron Familiar Witch's Oven before Eldraine, and now I'll be watching for it for the rest of my days. Yeah,
I think never have 2 worse looking cards been so good. Like, I just can't think of another example in Magic history where you took 2 such kind of rando low impact cards and you put them together and just have them be that good.
Yeah.
So yeah, totally brutal. So this brings me to another cheap little artifact paired with another cheap little creature, which just took the world by storm. And you'll know, CGB, that this deck has a special place in my heart. In fact, if you rewind to the very first ever original episode that I did of the show, which was not an introduction, featured this deck. And it was played and brewed by the very capable Aaron Gertler, who remains one of my favorite content creators. RIP for his content creator career. He decided to take a break, maybe never coming back to Magic. It was a sad day, but I was very proud of him.
We love you, Aaron.
Yep, Aaron just flaming on out there doing whatever cool stuff he's doing. Just a great human being. But in the meantime, this is a deck that I got on early, and I got on it hard. And so for those of you who don't remember this deck, or maybe weren't playing at the time, well, if you were playing at the time, you
just
would
play standard. It's still there. It just doesn't have this card. Go on.
So, okay, this is how I remember it. So I read Aaron Gertler's post in Reddit Spikes. Great place to go and get competitive deck building advice, by the way, chat. Crafties. And I read about this deck, and I was like, ooh, that sounds really fun. So I went ahead, crafted it up, put it together on the ladder. I played a game, and I was like, this deck is garbage. This deck is awful. But I was intrigued. I was like, but it's kind of sweet. So then I played another game, and I was like, okay, all right. And by game 4 or 5, I was like, oh God. Oh God, life will never be the same in standard. And we were proved out. That deck actually went all the way to a Pro Tour final. Now, granted, it did need another busted card to be printed to take it there. But this deck, I honestly, when I think back on the history of standard, this deck maybe terrorized people for longer than any other of like the big, well, maybe with the exception of the sack deck, right?
Dude,
this might be like
I keep waiting for you to say the name of the deck. It's killing me. I know what it is, but some listeners don't. You still haven't said what the deck is.
That's hilarious. All right, crafties, it is Temur Adventure. Some people call it Temur Clover. Named after the namesake card, Lucky Clover, and it was the luckiest of cards, let me tell you. And so this, if you hate Innkeeper in Standard now, do I have a story for you? Because this deck, when it was really going off, I mean, you could have these busted turns where you put like 4 or 5 lands into play, drew, 5 cards, exile a bunch of cards off the top of your library, dug for another Clover, went to your sideboard 4 times. I mean, this deck, when it was really going off, just went over the top of anything else that was possible in the format. And I don't know. To this day, it's some of the most fun I've ever had playing Magic was playing that deck, because it was really in a lot of ways pretty janky. And, you all of the creatures that you played were fantastic adventure creatures, but they were just kind of rando creatures on the board that didn't really do very much. But the play patterns were just so fascinating, and the way that you accrued advantage over a game was so incredible, and the way that you could finally combo off and kill your opponent on the final turn was so amazing, and the way that it just freaking tied control in knots made me feel so good. Felt so good.
I this love fest with Temur Adventures is making me throw up a little. Oh my gosh,
it's just one of my favorite decks of all time.
No, I mean,
so good.
So we didn't talk about it with Cauldron Familiar. Maybe we should have, but I think that Lucky Clover being banned when it was banned, which is, I believe, do I have this right? Was it like right after it was banned with Uro, right? Like it was slightly after Omnath came into the format and rotation happened, right?
I think it was banned at the same time Omnath was, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Cauldron Familiar was banned before the rotation. So Cauldron Familiar was like this preemptive ban. They took the cat out before it could dominate Standard, but they left in Edgewalling Keeper and Lucky Clover, which just took these adventure cards that were already good and gave you even more incentive to play nothing but adventures just by giving you free value at an insanely low price. And then I remember our 2021 standard testing was just like This format's just going to be Lucky Clover formats.
Yeah,
that's all that's going to matter. That's it.
And in our famous showdown, the top 2 decks were Teamer Adventure and Simic Adventure.
Yeah. Yep. And Simic Adventure really, that video still does very well. We broke standard 2021. That Simic Adventure list that we proclaimed the best deck was the best because it had a go over the top strategy of Teamer Adventure. Like it won that mirror. And Lucky Clover was really just poised to dominate forever, it seemed like, for an entire year. If they hadn't banned Lucky Clover and Cauldron Familiar, can you imagine what the last year would be like? It's hard to picture. You can say what you want to about how annoying Bone Crusher Giant has been, or some of these other cards that people are fed up with, but I mean, man, these cards would have been dominant. And Lucky Clover, we talked about Fires of Invention and Wilderness Reclamation being enchantments, so some decks just can't get rid of them. And so when they work, you just feel like you didn't play the game. Lucky Clover is a 2-mana artifact. Like, so many colors just can't remove that. Not at any kind of a reasonable rate, which means if you have 20 adventure cards in your deck, you not only have 20 creature threats that the opponent has to think about, you have 20 spells whose effects have been doubled. And I bet that 4th or 5th game where you're like, oh my God, I bet I know what happened. I bet you had 2 Lucky Clovers out.
I think it was some combination of Beanstalk Giant, Lucky Clover, and then anything else, right? Dude, that's what happened.
Like once you double Clover, or once you Clover and Innkeeper, there's just it's like, what are we doing? This is insane. The card, it's too free. It's so free.
So I remember during that deck's ascension, one of the most common questions that I got asked as a noted Teamer Adventure Mage was, I'm playing XY deck. How do I combat this deck? How do I sideboard against the deck? And it always felt like a cop-out, but my main answer was, good luck. Because how are you supposed to tackle it? There was no good way to do it. There really wasn't.
Playing cheap cards that could take over the game quickly, like Cauldron Familiar, Mayhem Devil, and Witch's Oven? No. Were you playing Fires of Invention, and did you have some kind of a strategy to steal every single permanent from your opponent by about turn 4 or 5? No? Oh, you're trying to cast something for 5 mana and hope it works out. Oh, yeah, that's not going to work.
Sorry, bro.
No, your opponent has endless value, endless answers. They're doing about 50 things a turn. They're ramping, and when they want to, they can draw 5, which is another card we might get to.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So yeah, this deck was, in retrospect, it was another one of these like greatest hits of most punchable in the face Magic cards. Some of these lists even got kind of greedy and ran cards like Oro and Nissa as well. So
yeah, I mean, that's the greedy deck in the format. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think that the vanilla build ended up being better in a vast majority of situations. But anyway, this deck was just another deck which by the end of its reign of terror, it was just one of the most groan-inducing decks. And we all know that feeling of like your opponent goes turn 2 Clover, turn 3 again anything, basically. And you just had that kind of yawning, horrible feeling in your stomach of like, oh God, I'm just never going to win this game.
Clover should have been banned before the release of Zendikar Rising, in my opinion, because it was so poised for takeover anyway. And they banned Cat, so they showed that they did have a forward thinking. And what oddly saved Clover for a few more months was the fact that Omnath was even more like more broken.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's what bailed out Clover and gave it a few more months to live. And then they figured out, we just put Omnath and Clover in the same deck, and we don't lose games to anything else.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah.
Man, oh my goodness. And you know what's wild, Covert Go Blue, is that throughout all of this, we haven't even spoken about the Great Henge.
You don't need to. It did nothing. It did nothing when it could be elked. It did nothing when like games were like just ending and people were getting value for free. Because look, You don't need to untap with a Lovestruck Beast and then pay 4 mana to play something that gives you 2 life and an extra card for every creature you control when you're getting extra cards starting on turn 1 and 2 from Edgewall Innkeeper, or just a truck of value from Cat Oven Mayhem Devil. Or Fires of Invention, by the way, on turn 5 when you're going to use that Great Henge. Fires of Invention is tripling your mana.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's fun.
That's a world we lived in, where the Great Henge was a set piece.
I mean, it's just wild to think that like Great Henge decks for a long time were like tier 3 and or just not even tier decks, basically.
Like somebody put one in a Teamer Adventure list and we're looking at like, you don't need that. You already got so much value. That's silly. Why would you? It was
a flex spot, right? Yeah, like people ran as a flex spot.
What if you don't have a Lovestruck Beast and you hit it off your Escape to the Wild? It's garbage.
I mean, oh my goodness, right? But let's talk about it for a little while, because I think that the Great Henge ended up being like it was like a tier 4 Eldraine banger or something like that. It ended up being, it was like 4th wave Eldraine or something.
It had a window. Like it had a window where it was hard to remove. And that was before Kaldheim released, but after Uro, Omnath, and Clover were banned. And then suddenly getting a Henge down decided games for like the first time. The Lovestruck Beast into Henge plan for a hot minute there was one of the best things you could be doing in Standard, for sure. And then Binding the Old Gods just came along and ruined that fun. That up. Yep. Well, and I think more than anything, just Ultimatum plan. It was like, oh yeah, cute artifacts, cute drawing cards, cute board. I'm just gonna win the game. Yeah, Ultimatum, a pretty big part in that. Just enough cards to make it a Splinter Twin effect, a tooth and nail effect for the boomers. Yeah. So, boy, I don't know. Like, and it's interesting how these are like all of the busted aspects of Eldraine. Let's just spend a minute focusing on the cards that made it through. You know, the cards that for that they just coasted through their entire time in Standard. I mean, Edgewall Innkeeper has to be just like ground zero, right? When you take a mechanic that's built in and pushed already, and you add very cheap, very low cost incentives to play the mechanic, especially when it comes to card advantage, it's too much. Yeah. If they had made a Venture into the Dungeon creature that, like, for 1 mana was a 1/1 that said whenever you play a creature venture into a dungeon, that would make the mechanic good. Yeah. Edgewall Innkeeper was like 10 times better than that. You want cards? Take some cards. Enjoy. I mean, imagine CGB if it was like 2005, you were playing Magic and like future CGB just walked into the room and like grabbed you by the shoulders and was like, okay, younger CGB, check it out. In future Standard, they're going to make these adventure creatures. The adventure creatures are going to have a spell on one side and they're going to be a creature on the back side. So they're going to be a 2-for-1. But wait, there's more. Every time you play the creature, you're actually going to get to draw a card as well. What would you have thought? Would you have thought that future CGB had just like drunk a little bit too much like space gin or what? I think I would have asked what color it was, and when future CGB said green, there would be no more credibility. Yeah. I'm like, you would have laughed, like, get out. Oh, it's not blue. Lol. Whatever. Green. If you go to 2005, like green doesn't draw cards. No. It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't have this endless value. It doesn't have broken planeswalkers. The only good card or something. Yeah. It just doesn't do these things. It plays big dumb animals. That's what green deck do. Tarzan. You know that it I don't know. I'm like gonna cough thinking about it, but there was a time where green wasn't the universal broken color. And when you think about all the green cards we've talked about already, it's obvious at this point that green got a push, and I probably what future CGB should have told 2005 CGB was stick with green, man. Because back then, this is a true story. Back then, I was winning regionals. I was regional champion with a mono green deck back then. Yeah. And
Okay.
if future CGB had said stick with green, be covert, go green, you know, or come up with a better name, but make it related to green, my branding, who knows? I'd probably be much more famous and way more ahead of the game here. I'd be given the biggest of YouTubers a run for their money.
I mean, it is just ridiculous to think about, like, how could we take a card like Bone Crusher Giant and make it even better, right? How could we take a card like Love Struck Beast and make it even better? And I think that that's what Edgewall Innkeeper really did. And so I think what I learned from Edgewall Innkeeper was that, like, it's like a two-head move to incentivize you to play cards that are already good, right?
I love that. Yeah.
You know, it's like, imagine if Force of Will had draw a card on it, you know, it would just be so obnoxious. And this is like the standard equivalent of that.
Don't give them ideas.
Oh God, I know. Dude.
Look what you've done.
Go sit in the corner, Arjuna. Think about it. But I mean, that's really it for me. Like, adventure creatures didn't need to be better, you know? And I think that it was just a huge mistake to print not one, but two build-arounds that gave you an even bigger incentive to play them.
Strong agree.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. I mean, do we need to go into the adventure creatures?
I mean, only to the fact that they made so many cards unplayable, and those cards might be playable now. So we spent almost a year as like people trying to evaluate Magic cards, looking at a card and saying, if the opponent has Bone Crusher Giant, did this card matter? And if the opponent has Brazen Borrower, did this card matter? And if the answer is no to either one of those, the card was basically unplayable, because those cards are in enough decks and in enough spots that you just can't run a card like Immerstorm Predator. Haha, Brazen Borrower. Heh, nice move, noob. Yeah. You lose tempo, you lose 4 mana. It was too much. So in that respect, I think that's what we can say about them. But I also want to say that every format has those cards. They're Flame Tongue Kavus, being one of the first ones that got people thinking this way. Hostage Taker and Ravenous Chupacabra also kind of did this thing.
Ooh, good Chupacabra was nasty.
Removal spells without downside and possibly with upside, like a body that you get, like Brazen Borrower and Bone Crusher Giant provide. They will shape a format, and you have to be on the lookout for the next one as the spoiler season comes out, of what removal card that has very low downside and possibly upside is going to shape the format.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that Murderous Rider ended up being one of the weaker ones, given that it looked so powerful.
Yeah. In standard 2022, I'm actually starting to go through a phase where I start thinking, if my opponent plays a Shambling Ghast and sacrifices it to a Deadly Dispute, did my creature die and do nothing? And I'm starting to hate X1s in kind of a similar way. But I think we've got a ways to go before it's ubiquitous, you know?
I agree. But I think you're right. It does just give us a taste of what's around the corner. And I think that it's kind of interesting, because I think the nearest analog that I can think of in recent design to these adventure creatures is actually the cycle of free creatures in Modern Horizons 2.
Sure.
And I'm trying to remember what they're called. They're named after what?
Incarnations?
Virtues. Yeah, the Incarnations.
The Incarnations,
right? Yep. And so this is this other like cycle of creatures that has just single-handedly come along and shaped what's possible in the format. And so I think that we do need to be looking out in these upcoming standard sets for these other cycles of creatures that have these mechanics that are going to do that.
I'm not surprised we've had a lot to talk about in this cast, but there's actually so many things I want to hit. So let's just break it down to what did we learn from, and I'll throw you a card and we can just kind of go down the list.
Okay, sounds good.
What did you learn from Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath?
You know, honestly, the thing I learned from Uro was that like someone on the design team should have been fired or relocated like a year ago. You know what I mean? And I mean, that's a mean thing to say, and I don't really mean it. And I'm sorry, whoever designed Oro, but I just think that like that card was so beyond the pale. You know,
Yeah.
like we can forgive them for Oko, we can forgive them for a lot of things, but I think Oro was just egregious. It was just an egregious Magic card.
I can't stress enough that cards like Oko and Embercleave and Fires of Invention, people had to figure it out. And with Uro, everybody looked at this and was like, well, that's broken.
Yeah.
It's just, it's the only thing that's going to matter. And it did. And it had to be banned in multiple formats. So sometimes what looks that good is just too good. And Omnath would still be legal. It wouldn't be rotating, so it doesn't have to be part of that show. But that was the only other time I've just looked at a card and been like, nope.
I was gonna say there are two cards that have made me just like lurch forward in my chair when I was reading the spoilers. The first one was Smuggler's Copter, which was banned within a month of release. And the next one was Uro, which should have been banned within a month of release.
And instead, just took a year,
entirely too long.
Yeah. Okay, Escape to the Wilds.
You know, call me crazy. I didn't think this one needed to be banned.
I'm still with you. I was going to ask you, instead of necessarily what did we learn, did this have to be banned? And it feels like it was just to make sure that Adventures wasn't the only thing, and Adventures still is a really good thing. I'm still not sure this one had to go, but maybe I'm
here's
wrong.
My question is, what deck does Escape to the Wild see play, and if it's in standard right now?
Adventures, but it would replace Goldspan Dragon.
Yeah, it's just like I don't see a great shell for it.
Yeah, and then your deck doesn't close. An ultimatum means that you need to close. And like the adventure deck has been more reactive, and Goldspan Dragon lets it do that, play with some counter spells to combat ultimatum. So I don't think Escape to the Wilds would be in a competitive deck right now. And maybe I'm wrong. Obviously, you have to go back and re-engineer the format, but I'm still surprised that this one is banned. I was surprised at the time, and I'm still surprised today.
I think it was murdered for Clover's sins. That's, I think, what happened.
Yeah, I think the lesson we learned from Escape to the Wilds is sometimes you have to be sure.
Yep. I mean, and hey, man, you know, if that was the double tap that the archetype needed, then there you go. Better safe than sorry.
Unbanned card, but a card that got a huge nerf. Lurrus of the Dream Den is rotating.
Yeah, Lurrus. Oh, my goodness.
I'll go first if you like.
Take us there, man.
What I learned from Lurrus is that probably most of my decks should just play cheaper cards. Because when you play good, cheap cards, you're going to have a good win rate anyway. And I remember when Lurrus first came out, I was like, it pained me to do things like cut Mayhem Devil from Rakdos Sacrifice, for example. And a million examples of all the different Lurrus decks that were brewed. And you know what? Again and again and again, it just meant we were playing cheaper cards, and Lurrus was like this free value engine that you got for playing cheap cards. And you just won a lot of games by playing good, cheap cards. And then the games that you needed Lurrus, there she was.
It was like a little taste of modern in standard, you know? That's kind of how I felt about it. You look a lot of these Lurrus decks, and they just look like decks from older formats. And they are. I mean, I think that's the takeaway for me, is that like a Lurrus deck is a modern deck or a legacy deck. It's just playing weaker cards, right? But I think that like a lot of the fundamental game plans, like Rogues is a really good example. I think Rogues has a lot more in common with a deck like Delver than you might think, right? So I'm with you, man. Cheap cards are great, and they certainly don't seem to be getting any worse.
All right, next one. And this one is arguably a card that should have been banned, was banned or suspended in a format, and is arguably the cornerstone of the best deck right now. Winota, Joiner of Forces, is rotating.
When they banned it in Historic, I don't know if you remember, but I went on an angry tirade about how it should have just been removed from Standard too. And I stand by that. I think Winota is one of those cards which is either unplayable or busted. There's really no middle ground. The other thing is, it's one of those cards where if one player is having fun, the other player isn't.
Really?
And I just don't see a place in Magic for cards like Winota. Like I just like sure, occasionally they make you cackle with glee. I've played some Winota decks, whatever, but I think that the net fun value coming from Winota is like at an all-time low.
It's one of those things that's very fun if it's printed in a casual, like a casually appealing way. Like if they had made this like 6 or 7 mana, I would have still probably tried to play a deck with it somewhere because the popping off is fun, but I wouldn't play it every day because it was easy to counter, get under, and just not reliable. And it's when it's aggressively costed to the point that you face it every day, that's when there's no more fun. And Arena has again just it's made it so that so many more games of Magic get played than ever before, and it makes cards that would have been fun in a dose miserable as a daily experience.
I think Winota would have been a lot of fun, like in back in the day Magic, where people were net decking all the time, where like you went to your local F&M and someone just had like a super funky Winota brew that went off every now and then. Like it would have been a really fun card for that kind of an environment. But I think in this day and age, it's just not fun. I think everything about Winota that could have been fun has kind of been stripped away, in my opinion.
I would also say that the deck building puzzle isn't very fun. It's too broad, human, non-human. Like somebody does the math and figures out this many humans, and then you play non-humans. I also think that the ability of Winota to hit itself is just kind of stupid because it ensures that you already have a certain quota of humans in your deck, and that Winota kind of has sneaky haste so often. I feel like it should have maybe been non-legendary. It just needed more restrictions or a higher cost.
Yeah, in retrospect, I think an easy way to fix the card a little bit would just be to say when one or more creatures attack, and you just get one trigger.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It's simple.
All right.
All right, you got any more?
I have 2 more.
Okay.
I know which one I'll say for last. Ugin the Spirit Dragon. I bring this one up because I have rarely disagreed as much with other human beings as I do when people every day that I have made content with Ugin have asked for Ugin to get banned, have called for Ugin needing to be banned. I don't know, like people hate this card, and I cannot believe how many times I have heard they need to ban Ugin, and I feel like we got to talk about it. It's rotating. I don't think it was ever close to being banned. Was it ever tier 1?
Not in my memory. That is, what's funny to me? I had a moment of asking myself whether it was in what was it, M20? Because I can't tell you the last time I saw Ugin on the battlefield. Like, I've played so much standard. Probably the last time I saw it on the battlefield is when I was playing it as like a janky one-of in my own Sultai Ultimatum deck right at the beginning of that format.
Sure.
But other than that, regular standard has basically been a ghost town for Ugin.
Yeah. Can you name the best Ugin deck in standard right now? I believe I can. I believe it's like a mono red deck with Ironcrag feet. And I think and it showed up in one of the championships. Maybe it was the Kaldheim championship. But yeah, the idea was to cast Ironcrag feet on turn 5 and ramp out Ugin, and a few people played it.
Maybe like a Crackle with Power back end or something like that. I don't know. Maybe that's a different deck, but anyway.
But you could. You're such a memer. You're like, Brash Taunter, Crackle with Power. Let's go. Ironcrag feet. Go. Yes. But I mean, that's how far off Ugin has been to being competitive in this format. And I don't know, man. I've got to dagger the people who want it banned. I just have to, because it's so. I think it was an awesome. I think that M21 is one of the best core sets, overshadowed by so much broken stuff. I think it was a sweet core set that would have legitimately shaken up most metas that it could have been introduced to, but not this one. Just not this one. And it's going to take a lot of sweet cards with it, Ugin being one of them.
Yeah. I remember Covert Blue that for a while with the previous standard 2021 queue, fetching Ugin from your sideboard was like shorthand for doesn't understand the format. It was kind of an inside joke between the two of us, right? Because of how rarely either of us ever fetched that card from the board. And that should give you some idea. I mean, it's a sweet card. I think it was a great printing. I think that it did exactly what it should have done in the format. And you know what? A+ for Ugin. Just a good run in standard.
Yeah.
Very well balanced.
Kind of sad
Good
to see it
times.
go. I think it would be interesting in 2022. And then maybe we could have a conversation about its power level. But even then, the creature lands would eat it for breakfast. So,
Yeah.
I don't know. I wanted to mention it. And then the last one that I have. You ready? Yorion.
I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming. So I'll let you have the final word on Yorion. So I'll just say briefly what I think about it, because we all know whose baby it is. In the end, I think Yorion ended up being by far the coolest companion, and like just from a game balance and design perspective, one of the sweetest cards ever printed. I can see why you love it so much, because the deck building possibilities are just endless. And honestly, the only time when Yorion has been any kind of a problem was just when it was in shells with other cards that were the actual problem. But Yorion has really never been the problem. And it has inspired like probably more deck lists than any other card I can think of. And I've had a lot of fun with Yorion, playing with it, playing against it. I think in the end, the dials were tweaked just right on that card, especially with the companion nerf, which I think it's very well balanced with that. I still think it would have been kind of ridiculous if they hadn't nerfed that. So in closing, Yorion is just a sweet, sweet, good old sky boy, and I'm gonna be sad to see it go.
Aw, but it's a scam, right?
It is totally a scam.
A scam that results in sweet decks. I'll take that scam.
Which is why I have good things to say about it.
Yes. Okay. Yorion. Oh man, I feel like I'm giving an eulogy, but I kind of am. So the history of, like, when I think people discovered how much we love the blink mechanic, the first time I remember it like being on a creature and just really lighting people up, Restoration Angel, which was a defining feature of a format that featured cards to blink like Blade Splicer and Thragtusk. Restoration Angel could only target other non-angel creatures. It required you to have a very specific creature type, but it also gave you a body at an okay rate, and it had flash, so it let you be responsive. Very cool card. What Yorion did that really took the blinking archetype and mechanic to the next level, it said not just any permanent, any and all permanents that you want to blink this turn, you get to do it. You get to do it. Enchantments, artifacts, planeswalkers. And so now your head is spinning from all kinds of ways. You could get value from it by blinking your Fires of Invention and using your mana to do something else, for example, just because it wasn't on the battlefield for a period of time. Really cool exploit, so to speak. Or you could spam all those Theros enchantments that at the time when they were revealed, we were kind of like, it's an enchanted theme block and they put spells on enchantments. Who cares? Turns out Yorion cares a lot. And suddenly Omen of the Sea isn't just a playable card. It brings with it cards like Omen of the Sun and Omen of the Forge that people didn't give the time of day to. And that's sweet. On top of that, the requirement was a sweet one, but go on.
Sorry, I just wanted to butt in there just a sec. Two of my favorite things to do with Yorion, A of all, just to hide some permanent that you wanted to protect from like your opponent's ECD or something. And you could do this with, fun little, like, you could do this on your opponent's turn, for example, with the Prince. So you could get into these cool little loops. Another sweet thing was just to like exile away all of your creatures and then Wrath the Board. So
that's a good Bia-Vol. That's one of the better Bia-Vols of the day.
It's just, you could just do some really, like, I think a lot of people think about like offensive Yorioning, but you could do a lot of defensive Yorioning as well.
Yeah.
So anyway, back to you.
Okay. I love the requirement. I hated it at first. I am one of those people that for 20 years, Arjuna, 20 years, I would never put the 61st card in my deck. Strictly doing it wrong. Hard line.
Yeah.
Never. Won't do it. You are strictly doing it wrong. If you don't have the backbone and the intelligence to make the final cut, that's on you, and I won't be that guy. I will never back down. And here comes a card that says you've got to play 20 more cards. And honestly, this was a crucial bridge for me to getting into Commander. It really was, because I realized by being given an incentive to play an 80 card deck that they could function, that you could get your land right so it could be consistent, that you could fill it with cards that did work, that your mulligans weren't all disasters. I think there was a part of me that just always, if I lost to some inconsistency, I would blame the 61st card if it was there. Being forced to play 80 to get access to a really cool upside, yes, there are inconsistencies to an 80 card deck, but it's not unplayable. It can still function, and you can tweak and build it, and you play more cards than you would before, because you just get experiences with more cards in the format. It's like the format's just a little bit bigger for you. And later, cards like Emergent Ultimatum actually made this a benefit, because you didn't draw all your clunky situational 7 drops. You left them lurking somewhere deep in the 80 in most games and accessed them. And that was freaking sweet. It was so cool in Best of One to be playing an 80 card deck with a 15 card wish board, that you could go get with like some of the like Fae of Wishes or Raven's Warning and things like that, and Yorion. Like you just have access to so many more game experiences, and Yorion opened those doors, and now I play Commander, and I actually work on tuning Commander decks, and I see kind of a beauty in making a 100 card pile work, and I don't shy away from Historic Brawl. I'm excited that's 100 cards, I just don't think that would have happened without Yorion. So, yeah, here at Yorion's rotation eulogy from CGB, for those who stayed till the end and got to experience it, I do have to say that the card expanded the way I see the format. Anybody who ever said it would be banned, you're haters. It served a role, an important one, and I'm going to miss it. I always will. I think people have wondered if I can even cope, if my channel can go on. And at this point, I'm Rose, and Jack is cold. He's not speaking anymore. And it's time to let him go. Time to let him go to the bottom of the ocean with the rest of the Titanic. But I'll never forget you, Yorion, and my heart will go on.
And Yorion will live on in Historic Brawl. So if you ever want to take the noodle out for a ride, you can resurrect Falkor and go to it. And I think that's probably a good place for us to wrap up here. Thanks for sticking with us, Crafties. It's been a long one, but hopefully a goodie. And, there's just so much more that we could say about one of the most busted standards of all time. But I think we'll basically leave it here. I'm sure we'll keep throwing daggers into the past as time goes on. But for now, CGB, I'm just really stoked about looking forward to the next format. And just once more, saying it so that God can hear it. Just please make Midnight Hunt not the next Eldraine. Please, 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 please.
You have one job.
You just had one job.
Eldraine again. That's your one job. Don't Eldraine ever again.
Ever again. So yeah, so as long as that happens, happy Arjuna, because Standard 2022 has been one of the most balanced and sweetest formats that I've played in a long time. So may it continue to be so.
Amen.
All right, Crafties. I will curtail the usual outro, but thank you so much for joining us. You can watch this on CGB's YouTube. You can listen to it on Spotify, among other places. And CGB, I look forward to catching you next week for what will probably be another spoiler episode.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Later, Crafties. Don't Eldraine ever again.
Ever again. Ever again.